Understanding this though is an essential skill for every trap producer, and this last thing is the most important part of this tutorial, which is something I do not see enough producers using. Alright, what's good YouTube? So in this tutorial, I'm going to be going over how Pyrex Whippa makes his signature drum patterns. In this tutorial, I'm going to be going over his favorite sounds and drum kits, how he makes his hi-hat, snare, and 808 patterns, how he mixes his drums, his go-to effect plugins, how he masters his beats, as well as various tips and tricks along the way. Also, if you want any of the drum sounds that I use in this tutorial, there's a link in the description where you can download them completely free. Also, make sure to follow my Instagram and Twitter at FinnaFinesse. I'm going to be giving away my drum kit there, as I have been every night after every video gets posted, so go look out for that. Okay, so let's talk about Pyrex Whippa's style. It's kind of like the opposite of what I talked about in the Metro Boom tutorial. In that I said with Metro, he uses simple but effective drum patterns with complex and constantly changing melodies. However, with Pyrex, it's all about complex drum patterns with simple and consistent melodies. That being said, when you make a Pyrex Whippa type beat, there's nothing wrong with taking a lot of time with your drum sounds. This is something he talks about in his interview on the Producer Grind podcast. Also note that this entire tutorial will be revolved around the idea of making beats as quickly as possible while keeping simplicity a priority. But with that in mind, let's talk about drums. So first off, for sounds, Pyrex has his own drum kit, so you may think his sounds are inaccessible, but I'm here to tell you they're not, because a lot of the drum sounds that he uses come from cardiac drum kits, specifically the cardiac above the rim kit. He also uses, along with practically every Atlanta trap producer, the Lex Luger, Polo Boy, Zay, and DY drum kits. Basically sounds that everyone has, you know, the hit one hats, the spins and Zay 808s, Lex Luger slap claps, Lex Luger snares, rack kicks, stuff like that. As for mixing them, for practically all your drum sounds, specifically your snares, claps, 808s, and hi-hats, you want to use these knobs right here. The out knob, which will tighten your sounds, the amp knob, which will just make everything louder and distort more, and the FX knob, which will just alter some of the frequencies in the sound. One thing though everyone needs to understand is I've seen a ridiculous amount of tutorials where people are saying that the amp knob is a preamp. It's really not, it's just a volume knob. See, a preamp, when you turn it up, it just amplifies the sound and it gives it more saturation, more color, or more harmonics, I'm pretty sure is the term. But volume simply just takes that exact same sound and makes it louder. So you may be thinking to yourself, then what's the point in using it if we just have the volume knobs? Well, because a lot of the times Pyrex will have his 808s and snares going beyond the peak levels that you can get with the pattern block. So what I'm saying is that he's turning his 808s and kicks all the way up, and then he's turning them up even further with this knob. Southside also does this, however he uses the volume knob right here instead of the amp knob. And as for usage, the out knob is super essential because practically all of your sounds, with only exceptions I'd say being claps, which Pyrex doesn't even use that often, should be getting tightened. The two main things you want to use it on is the hi-hats and the 808s, because when you tighten the sounds, you just make them a little bit more bouncy. Also, I've said it many times before, but generally with higher tempo songs, you'll have more tight drums, but not all the time. Also, Pyrex, along with producers like Southside, generally already know the best levels to use for the majority of their sounds, as they use them so often. And finally, for the FX knob, all it really does is adjust the peak of very specific frequencies in the preloaded sound. And if you use it, you should almost always turn it to the right instead of the left, because if you turn it to the left, it's just going to lower the volume. The only reason I'd ever say to use it is sometimes it can just help with certain sounds cutting better in the mix, because it's going to make certain frequencies stand out more than others. The last internal effect that he'll use is just the pitch knob, which is something I do not see enough producers using, because a lot of people fail to understand what it does to drum sounds. See, when you pitch something up, whatever sound you're using is going to get slightly tighter and sharper, and vice versa when you pitch it down. So instead of just using the out knob, what you can try to do to get a slighter version of this effect is just come up to this pitch knob right here, and while the drums are playing, just mess with the pitch knob just a little bit until you get a sound that you want. Here's an exaggerated example to prove this. Here's what the hi-hats in this beat sound like with a really low pitch. And here's what they sound like at a really high pitch. Again, you might not notice it because it's a really subtle difference, but it still is a difference, so it's something that you should definitely try out. So as for external effects, the only one that's really worth mentioning is Effector, which he does use a lot. He mainly just uses this plugin to distort and filter his 808s, because using distortion on your 808s can just help it stand out more in the mix. Generally for his 808s, he drags the FX knob into this area here, and then for the filter, which you want to put on after this, he'll generally have it sit in these ranges up here, or he might be just using a basic EQ and cutting out the highs. You can just do do that too. Also, a great way Pyrex makes his hi-hat stand out more in his beats is also by adding like a slight distortion. Specifically, you want to use this preset. It's called compression and it comes from the fruity fast distortion, which all of you should have. It's super subtle, but again, it makes a difference because it makes the sounds just sound a little bit sharp. Specifically, this compression preset from fruity fast distortion, it's really subtle, but it just makes the hi-hats a little bit sharper. So without these effects on the 808 and hi-hat, the beat sounds like this. But with the effects, it sounds like this. But that's all you need to know for effects. So let's talk about drum patterns. Let's start with the 808s because that's generally what you're going to be starting your beat with. So Pyrex just really sticks to the essential trap 808 and kick pattern, which looks something like this. Understanding this though is an essential skill for every trap producer because like every 808 pattern revolves around this one, and you'll hear variations of it. Like sometimes people will do something like this, or they might just not use those 808s and they just might use a select few, do something like this, or they might just do this. And the same thing goes for the snare pattern. They almost but not always revolve around this pattern right here. The most common variations are usually these three right here. So let's talk about his drum rolls. First off, make sure you come up to this magnet right here and select either third or sixth step because practically every hi-hat pattern you hear Pyrex use is some sort of triplet roll. It's also useful to do this because what you can do if you want some sort of double roll or whatever the heck you call it, all you need to do is hit Alt on your keyboard, then U, and it'll open up this piano roll chopper right here. And one thing you can just do is mess with the time manipulation here, whatever the heck it's called. And the reason this is so useful is the chopper tool is always going to be in that double time signature that we're not using. So doing this a lot will save you a lot of time and frustration because take it from me, having a switch between the two constantly can get really annoying. Also make sure to use this paintbrush tool up here as Pyrex and Southside do a lot. It just makes experimenting and creating hi-hat patterns so much easier, and you just want to take your time. What they do is they'll shorten a note like this. You just want to click it and then you just want to drag your mouse along the paintbrush and they'll create constant rolls. Also, kind of like what I talked about with the kicks in the Metro tutorial, Pyrex will also put these 808 rolls a lot at the end of his patterns, but it's really up to you. There's so many different types of 808 rolls you can do. Just do whatever feels right. One thing that is good practice though is don't be making all these like crazy 808 and hi-hat rolls before you actually have an actual pattern laid out. In other words, keep things simple and just do things one step at a time. Also because sometimes you won't even need them whatsoever, so don't force it. Also just try messing with the velocity a little bit because it can help a lot with making your patterns more bouncy. Also generally with these types of hi-hats, specifically ones like this where it's hitting a lot of notes in a short period of time, what you want to do is just drag the velocity down, so you just turn down the volume a little bit, because if you don't, it's just going to be way louder than all the other drum sounds playing and it's not going to sound good. So yeah, to do that, all you have to do is highlight the actual roll itself, hold your mouse and then just scroll wheel down, and what that'll do is turn everything down evenly. And as for types of hi-hat rolls, it's honestly up to you. Just do whatever feels right. Here are some examples of the common hi-hat rolls that you hear a lot in Pyrex and Southside beats. But at the end of the day, it's honestly up to you wherever you place them. I suggest you just listen to these types of rolls, understand what they look like, how to make them, and most importantly, what they sound like. But that's it for the hi-hats. Finally, the only other thing to note is that with Pyrex, he uses rim shots a lot in his beats. The one thing you should try though is turning the velocity all the way up instead of just turning the volume up, because that can help with making them hit a little bit harder. But yeah, that's it for drums. So let's briefly talk about melodies. As for melodies, I'm not really going to go over anything but this. For VSTs, Pyrex normally sticks to Electra X the majority of the time. He also does use a few orchestra libraries from Kontakt for his beats. I don't know the exact ones he uses, but I'd imagine they're probably like Spitfire libraries, as that's what a lot of people seem to be using nowadays. But a lot of people have this misconception that like he's the one making these flute guitar type melodies that you hear him use a lot, but the majority of the times these are just samples. It's really just that these types of melodies match his style because they have a lot of bounce to them because they're using a lot of tight sounds. And when he's making the Electra X type melodies himself, he just uses like chopped up chords like this, for example, that have constant spacing between the notes. Also, as I say in like every single tutorial, stick to tension because that's going to give you a dark vibe. Keep it as basic as it gets, and above all, don't spend too much time making them. And as for mastering his beats, Pyrex doesn't really have anything on his master. Like he doesn't even use a soft clipper, but what he does do is he EQs the master with this pre-given one in the effect rack. The levels are never consistent, but just EQ to your liking. But do know that the general EQ for all trap beats looks something like this. So basically just mess with the lows, mids, and and highs, don't overcomplicate it, and just do it until you get a sound that you like. And this last thing is the most important part of this tutorial. When the beat is done, go into the top left corner, select File and hit Save As, make a new version of the project, and then delete all the melodic components, pattern blocks, and VSTs till all you have left is just the drum sounds. Now when you make your next beat, you'll have this template of perfectly leveled and mixed sounds, so you can just focus on making the beats instead of doing all of that stuff. This is especially important because Pyrex makes his beats insanely quick, so you don't want to be spending too much time mixing and doing all that other boring stuff. This is also important because all this stuff should really be coming instinctively, meaning you don't put too much thought into it, and that's something that happens when you make beats so quickly, is that you don't give yourself enough time to overthink it in the first place. Yeah, but that's it for this tutorial. Once again, I dropped my first drum kit. The link to get that is in the description. Also, as many people have requested, I'm gonna start posting my beats on my BeatStar page, which is at FinnaFinesse.beatstars.com. Also, make sure to follow my Instagram and Twitter at FinnaTheGod to enter giveaways, keep up with what I'm doing, as well as by supporting this channel in general. But with that being said, make sure to like, subscribe, and peace.